Hi everyone, this is Shauna Tarosa, RAYAC Executive Officer, and this is my desk. In this monthly video cast, I go over questions that are coming across my desk every single day so we can have much smoother real estate transactions here in York and Adams counties. And so the question that I have today is, how can I get paid as a buyer's agent? So since the NAR settlement went into place in August of 2024, there have been some policy changes surrounding buyer agency compensation. So I wanted to break down how that all works, what the differences are, what you need to know, and how you as a listing agent need to answer questions that you're receiving from the prospective buyer's agents out there. So since the NAR settlement has gone into place, we all know now that you can no longer offer compensation in the MLS. Offers of buyer broker compensation can still be made, but they all need to be made outside the MLS and not through any channels in which are fed by the MLS. So doing things like a sign on the property itself or on your own individual or brokerage website indicating that you're offering buyer broker compensation are permissible, and phone calls, which is mostly what we're seeing, asking if there's buyer broker compensation, are perfectly okay. So that's one way buyer's agents can continue to get paid, is through a cooperative broker compensation if the seller chooses to do that route. The second way is that they can get paid through a seller concession that is negotiated as part of the agreement of sale. And the third is that the buyer can pay the buyer agent directly for any of their fees. But let's break down how you handle some of these questions, specifically focusing on cooperative broker compensation and seller concessions. So first, let's understand what the difference is between cooperative broker compensation versus seller concessions. What does that mean? So cooperative broker compensation is when the listing broker is offering the buyer broker compensation for bringing a buyer who is going to purchase the property. The seller has authorized and is paying the listing broker directly, but has authorized the listing broker to make an offer of compensation to pay the buyer broker fee as well. So if that is something that a seller is choosing to do, you would have that signed off on in the listing agreement. And so it's very specific in there, whether it's a flat dollar fee or a percentage of the sales price over what the listing broker is offering to the buyer broker, and it's all being authorized by the seller. Now, if you as a listing broker receive a phone call from a buyer broker, you get the question of, is there compensation being offered? So one of the things that PAR has put out is there's a great article that they have on asking better questions and you'll get better answers. So you as a buyer's agent, make sure you're asking the right questions to the listing broker. You're asking, are you offering cooperative broker compensation? Now you as a listing broker need to answer that question, and your answer to that question is under Section 6 of the listing agreement. If the seller has authorized you to offer cooperative broker compensation, your answer is yes, and you need to tell them the amount. So it's either a flat dollar fee or a percentage of the sales price. And it is that exact number. This isn't up to or potentially between here and there. It specifically says it in the listing agreement what the seller has authorized you to do. It's also extremely important that you are making sure that you're answering that question equally to whatever buyer representative is coming up to you and asking you that question, because your code of ethics indicates that you need to treat all parties honestly. And by treating all parties honestly, you're sharing the seller's wishes and their instructions in that listing agreement to answer those questions from prospective buyer's agent. So you have the answer to it. It's in Section 6 of the PAR listing agreement that tells you whether or not the seller wants you to offer compensation to a buyer broker. Now, if the answer is yes, they're offering cooperative broker compensation, and you have told the buyer agent that this is what they're offering, and the buyer wants to make an offer on the property, you would fill out the cooperative broker compensation form, or the CBC form, in addition to the agreement of sale. So that would be taken care of outside of the agreement of sale on the CBC form. So there wouldn't be a need to fill out on the agreement of sale that you're asking for seller concessions in addition to the CBC, unless that it's truly the case that you're asking for seller concessions in addition to the cooperating broker compensation offered. For example, let's say that your buyer agent fee that you were charging to your buyer is, say it's 10 donuts. And you're charging 10 donuts, and the listing broker is offering 10 donuts to you, and you sign off on the CBC that the listing broker is going to pay you 10 donuts, and you, the buyer agent, will receive 10 donuts from the listing broker. Now, if in addition to that you put into the agreement of sale under the seller concessions under 3A that you are requesting, that the buyer is requesting from the seller to pay 10 donuts for the buyer broker fee, what that actually means is we have a CBC sign for 10 donuts, and now on the agreement of sale, we have a request from the buyer under 3A to pay the buyer broker fee of 10 donuts. That means that the buyer broker is getting 20 donuts, which is double what they had agreed to in the buyer agency relationship. So if the CBC has covered the fee that you are charging from your buyer, you wouldn't be filling out the 3A section of the agreement of sale asking for an additional buyer broker fee unless the CBC did not cover the buyer agent fee that you were charging to the buyer, and the buyer wanted the seller to consider making an additional payment under the seller concession to pay the remainder of the buyer broker fee. So know what you're asking for, know what you're working with. If it is a cooperative broker compensation from the listing broker, that goes on the CBC. Now, if it is a seller concession, so what is a seller concession can be a little bit different, because a seller concession could be that they are requesting that the buyer is requesting that the seller pay a fee to help cover the buyer agency fee. In addition to that, they may be requesting some closing cost assistance in addition to also paying for the buyer agency fee as well. Now, you as a buyer's agent, if you ask a listing broker, are you offering any cooperative broker compensation? And the answer is no. You may ask the next question of, is the seller offering any seller concessions? Now, again, it would be a seller's choice whether or not they wanted to offer seller concessions up front. And you would have the answer to that question in the listing agreement under Section 7. It specifically states that the seller is authorizing the broker to advertise or inform potential buyers that they are offering seller concessions of a percentage of the sales price or any flat dollar fee, and that they are authorized to offer that out there. Now, this is not a seller concession that's in this listing agreement. This is not is not buyer broker compensation, it's a seller concession. So a buyer would have the choice to use those seller concessions for whatever they would choose. So that could be a buyer broker fee, it could be for closing cost assistance, it could be for down payment assistance. It does not matter what the buyer chooses to use those seller concessions for. So a seller would have a choice. The seller could say, yep, I want to offer seller concessions, and I want you to tell people that this is either a flat dollar amount or it is a percentage of the sales price. If the seller has chosen to do that and authorized you as the listing agent to share that information, you would have that in your listing agreement, and you would be required to share that with prospective buyers so that they were aware of what the seller was offering in terms of seller concessions. You can advertise seller concessions in the MLS. In Bright MLS, there is a box that indicates seller concessions, yes or no. While they don't have a specific place that you could put in a flat dollar amount or percentage of the sales price in there, you could put that in remarks, what you're specifically offering. But it would have to specifically say the seller is offering blank seller concessions. It is not compensation. It cannot be inferred to be compensations. You would have to specifically say that this is for seller concessions. Now, the seller could have a third choice where they're like, you know what? I would be willing to entertain seller concessions, but I don't want to offer anything up front, and that would be the seller's choice. So I'm going to convey that to you. I'm going to let you know that I'm willing to consider seller concessions, but I'm not going to offer anything up front. So that is a seller's choice. So if a buyer's agent were to ask the listing broker, is there a seller offering seller concessions? The answer would be yes, they're willing to offer seller concessions. Put your requests in the agreement of sale and it would be negotiable from there. So in those circumstances, if the buyer would like to request from the seller for the seller to pay the buyer broker fee, they would put that into the PAR agreement of sale under paragraph 3A and indicate what amount they were requesting for the seller to pay in concessions to cover the buyer broker fee. In addition to that, if the buyer also had additional requests for any type of closing cost assistance, they would also fill that out in 3B. So when you are a buyer agent, it is extremely important that you understand the differences between what a cooperating broker compensation is versus the seller concession. It's important that you're asking the right questions. You're asking the listing broker, are you offering cooperating broker compensation? If so, what amount? And 2, if you're not offering buyer broker compensation, is the seller offering any type of concessions? If so, what amount? Or is it negotiable and dependent upon whatever the buyer may need to ask for in the agreement of sale? So I strongly advise you to watch or to read the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors just listed article about better questions. You'll get better answers. Make sure you're reviewing these policies that you have with your brokerage company. Make sure you're talking these over with your legal counsel to making sure that when you're answering these questions, that you're answering them the same way for every single buyer broker out there, and you're not picking and choosing how you're conveying this information to potential buyers brokers. And as always, as I share in many of my videos, is that I'm not an attorney and I do not play one on TV. So always make sure you're checking with your own legal counsel. Make sure you're speaking with your broker so you understand these policies. Read those agreements of sale. Read those listing agreements to make sure you're understanding the right information that you have been instructed to convey from your seller. So I hope that information was helpful to you. If you ever have any other questions that you would like me to cover, please feel free to reach out to me because my doors and ears are always open to you. Thanks so much and have a great day.